QuickBooks Enterprise 2021. Two businesses and personal bookkeeping in one QuickBooks file using classes. Two inventory and cost of goods sold accounts. It's time to boldly account where no accountant has accounted before with QuickBooks Enterprise 2021. Here we are in our practice file. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown, selecting the open windows list. In prior presentations, we set up our company file, we set up our classes so that we can enter that data according to two locations or two different businesses and a personal account in one practice file. We then turned on the inventory so we can see what it would look like to have inventory involved in this data entry process and practice using the inventory with just one of the businesses or locations tracking the inventory. Now we're going to move on to having two of the business locations, two of the classes that need to be tracking the inventory, therefore needing two inventory accounts, two cost of goods sold accounts. To turn on the inventory, we went to the edit drop-down, we went to the preferences down at the bottom, we went to the items and inventory, we went to the company preferences up top, turned on the inventory. We're using the average method, which is going to be the default method for both Enterprise and Pro, although Enterprise does have the option to change to FIFO, first in, first out, which we may go into at a future point. Closing this back out, let's open up our reports by going to the Reports drop-down, Company and Financial. Let's open up our balance sheet, the balance sheet by class. Balance sheet by class, changing the dates up top and customizing the reports from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21. Then we're going to say OK, because it's fun to say OK. And then we have, of course, our inventory. So here we have our inventory that we entered last time, considering we only had B1, Business 1, or Location 1 tracking the inventory. This time we're going to be looking at location number 2. And we not only want to break it out in a separate column here for the classes, but we're also going to be breaking it out in a separate account. So we're going to be tracking the two separate accounts for inventory, setting up inventory for two different accounts. And that'll give us a kind of double check on the inventory. It should be going to two different accounts representing the two different locations, and also those accounts then applying to the two different classes. When we have our supplemental reports, the reports drop down, for example, going down to the inventory, and then going on over to the inventory. That's not inventory, here's inventory. Inventory valuation summary. Then we could be able to filter our reports then by the two separate accounts. So I'm going to then change the dates from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21. We're going to say, okay, this report, of course, should be tying in to what is on the balance sheet. And if I go to the customized reports up top and think about the filtering options, we could filter by account up top. And notice it's basically looking at all accounts that have inventory tracking related to it. And if we set up two different accounts, then we can go down here and we could track by the two separate inventory accounts, which we will be setting up. Also note, however, that if you did have one account and you want to filter these types of reports, you can also do it by class. So if we just basically use the items to separate out the classes, if we used either the items or if we used the manual input of the different classes for the different items, or if we use the customers to break out the items, then we could sort by the classes as well and break this report out to B1 and B2, for example, the two items, two areas where we might be tracking the inventory. But we're going to set up a whole nother account to do so. So then on the profit and loss, reports drop down, company and financial. If we take a look at the profit and loss by class, changing the dates up top from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21, we have our P&L by class. We're focusing in here on the cost of goods sold. We're going to do the same thing. We could break it out by items to break out the classes in the same account. We are going to break them out into two separate accounts, however, so they'll be in different classes and different line items. So to do that, let's go to the lists drop down. Let's take a look at the chart of accounts. The chart of accounts, and we want to have the inventory asset. I'm going to make this one for B1, and then I'll make another one for B2. So I'm going to right click. We're going to edit this item. I'm going to say, let's make this one for B1. I'm just going to label it B1, and that's going to be for the 12/100. I'm going to say save it and close it. And then I'm going to make another one for maybe like 12/200. Account rise up. And new, and this is going to be then the other current assets type of account. So it's going to be an other current asset account, and then continue. And this is going to be inventory too. So What did I say? I said 12. Hold on a second. I said 12,200. 12,200. So now I'm going to go back to that inventory. 12,200. And there it is. It's add new account. Add new account. So 12,200. 12,200. And this is going to be inventory. And this is B2. B2. And that is it. So I'm going to say save it and close it. Let's do the same thing for the cost of the goods that are sold, otherwise known as cost of goods sold, down here on the income statement side of things. I'm just going to look at the main cost of goods sold account, which is the 5,000 account. And notice these other ones are lining up and kind of taking up a lot of room in the 5,000s. If I have a lot of cost of goods sold, maybe I start the next one at like 5,500, and then I'd mirror all these accounts for the two different locations. So I'll make this one 5,500. So I'm going to say, let's edit this one first and make this B1. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. B1. And then I'm going to say, okay. And then the next one's going to, and I'm going to say, you haven't assigned a class, so cancel that. We want to assign a class. That's going to be B1. B1 is the class. Now I can save it and close it. Thank you for the message, QuickBooks, to remind me to do that. And then I'm going to say 5,500 is going to be the next one. So account rise up. Account rise up, and then we're going to say this is going to be a cost of goods sold type of account. Cost of goods sold type of account. And this is going to be 5500, and this is going to be cost of goods sold. Oh, hold on a second. Something funny happened. And then this is going to be B2, and class B2. Okay, I think that is it. So let's save that. We'll save that one out. And then, well, let's go to our home page now. And let's record some inventory. So I'm going to say we're going to purchase inventory now. Let's purchase some inventory. Purchase order first. This doesn't actually record a transaction, you'll recall. But this is going to be purchase. We're going to say purchase. This is who we purchase from. This is the vendor for when we buy inventory for B2. So I'm going to say B2. Tab, we'll set that one up, set up the vendor, and we're going to say that this is going to be vendor. I'm not going to put B2 down here so it doesn't actually show up on the PO, the purchase order. We're going to go to the additional information, put B2 down here and the additional information as well. I'm going to say okay, and then I have to assign this here, so I'm going to assign this out to be B2, and this is going to be as of 08/15/21. How about that? And then this is going to be inventory item for 2. Let's say 2 for B2. And then I'm going to say set that up. Set that up. It's going to be an inventory item. And the description we're going to put down here is just the same thing. Inventory item to B2. And I'm going to say that this one costs $150 just to make it different. And then it cost of goods sold. Now note down here, I'm gonna apply it to the cost of goods sold, the second cost of goods sold. Now we could have used the same cost of goods sold and then broke it out by class. So we could do that, but it'd be a little bit more difficult to do that to apply out the classes with this transaction. Although if we could do so in the default settings, by making the item the thing that drives the classes as opposed to the account that drives the classes here. So that's one method that you can do. We have the account driving the class, means that's why we had to put the class up top here. And then I'm going to save a whole nother different account, which is going to indicate clearly that it's going to go to B2 because it's tracking in another account entirely. And then we're going to say that the sales price is going to be, let's say, $250, and the income account now is going to be sales for 2. So the second sales account, once again, we could have used sales B1 and then break it out by class, but we're going to use an entirely different account for B2 sales. And then the inventory account is down here, same thing. We could break it out to have the classes B2, but I'm going to have an entirely different account. So that is that. I'm going to say save it, and that looks good, I believe. That looks good. So I think it looks good. Now note, if I go to the preferences, just to note where the preferences are, edit, preferences down here. If I go to the accounting up top, company preferences, if you're doing a lot of inventory with different segments and using classes, then you may want to set this instead of to accounts by item. And that can help you break out the class is automatically when you choose the item, which would be the inventory or service items. So we have it by account. So we're gonna have to manually input the classes to some degree. So I'm gonna say, okay, there we have that, and let's say we bought like 130 of them. So there we have it, and that looks good. This is going to do nothing in terms of the financial statements. It's just a request, but we'll use it to enter the bill when we receive our units of the inventory item 2B2 items. So we're going to say save it and close it. Save it and close it. Then I'm going to say now we received it. They came really fast. We got express mail, and now we receive the inventory with a bill. So we're going to say receive it with a bill. We're going to put this into the accounts payable 2 now, because we're paying it on the second accounts payable, tracking the accounts payable 2. This is going to be purchase vendor 2. It's going to say, hey, there's a purchase. I'm paraphrasing. Hey, there's a purchase order linked to that. Do you want us to make the bill from the purchase order? And we're going to be like, yeah, please. There it is. That's exactly what we want. And I'm going to say, okay. And then there, now it ties out here, so that looks good. And then our item, we're on the items tab instead of the expenses tab. We got the inventory item 2B2 description and so on and so forth. Now the class has been assigned out here because we assigned it out in the purchase order. So it pulled over. What's this going to do now? Increase the accounts payable for the accounts payable B2 account and in column B2 and accounts B2 because we set up 2 accounts. And then it's going to be increasing the inventory for hopefully B2 inventory account, separate account that we set up and in the column of B2. So let's check it out, save it and close it, checking it out, save it, close it, check it out. So now I'm checking it out, saved it and closed it. Now I'm checking it out, balance sheet. So then we have in B2, there it is. There's the 19,000, just as we suspected it would be. Bill, there it is. Okay, and then if I close that out, then the other side's going to be in inventory. So it's going to be in inventory. That is the inventory. The accounts payable is the other side. The accounts payable is going to be down here, and that's going to be in B2. So if I double click that, there's the 19.5 there. And then if we take a look at our report on inventory. So if I take a look at my inventory valuation summary report, then now we've got the inventory for B1 and the inventory for B2. If I wanted to filter this report then, so we can see we have inventory items for B1 and B2, and those tie out to what's on the balance sheet. Now, if I was to filter this report up top and go to the filters, I'd like to be able to filter it by account and or class, but those are not filtering like I would, okay. Now we can see that the B1 inventory items and B2 inventory items line up to what is on the balance sheet. Now if I filter these options, I can go to the customized reports and filter. I would like to be able to filter by amount or account or a class, but I may have to filter by simply the item. So let's just check these out. If I try to sort it by the account, and if I set the account here and say, hey, look, I would like to just see the inventory account and go on down to the inventory, like inventory 2 down here, inventory number 2, and then see if we can see that. I'm going to say okay. It doesn't actually filter it by the inventory because there's no actual inventory account on this report, so it's not really giving me the filter I would like, which would mean just showing the second line. Same with if I go to the classes, if I go to the filters option up top and I try to filter by classes, B2, which would be my second option, I'd say okay, how about by class? It's not filtering by class, so we could filter by item then if I want to filter out and tie into the inventory 1 and inventory 2 on the balance sheet by going to the customized reports, filters up top, and let's say, all right, let's filter by item then. So I'm going to say filter by the item. These would be the inventory items, and then I want to select multiple items, which would be the items for B2, however many inventory items I had, and I could select those items and then say okay. And then okay, and then I can memorize this report. I basically would memorize this report and say, here's all the items for inventory that's applied to inventory 1 and inventory 2, then tying out then to the balance sheet. This then ties out to the balance sheet. So let's do another one here. If I go back to the home page and set up another item, I'm going to say we have the purchase, and let's say this is for, we're purchasing from the same vendor purchase inventory. This is who we purchased from for B2. We're going to say that this is class. Now, if I don't put a class here, it won't follow through to when we pay the bill. So what if I don't put a class there? And then we go on through, let's make this a couple days in advance. And then I'm going to say this is inventory item number 2. And we'll say that we purchased 20 of them. And so there we have that. And so this is going to do nothing, but it will help us to then record the bill when we enter the bill. So I'm going to say save it, close it, and okay, yes. And it's telling me right here, I didn't assign a class. I'm going to say okay, and just see what happens when I don't assign a class. I'm going to go, okay, well, what if I go to the receive inventory? Now we're imagining we got the inventory that we ordered with the purchase order. And this is going to be then purchase B2. And it says now we can tie out the purchase order, linking the purchase order to the receive payment, so to the bill. I'm going to say, okay, good. That's the one we want. That's what we wanted to happen. And there we have it. So there it is. And then down here, notice once again, it didn't assign out the class because I didn't put it in the purchase order. So if I ignore both the warnings and don't assign the class, I should be able to see it fairly clearly given the fact that I set up 2 separate accounts. So also note that if I set this up by inventory item instead of by account, then the classes would populate automatically if I'm using Enterprise and set up inventory item as the default to drive which class it should go to. But I already know what this is going to do. It's going to increase the accounts payable. It's going to be going to the proper accounts payable built B2, and it's going to be going to the B2 inventory. But it'll be an unclassified in terms of the classification, and then I'll be able to pick that up because it'll be clearly seen. So I'm going to say save it, I'm going to say okay, and then it gives me that warning again. I'm going to ignore it and say okay, I ignore it. What happens? Well, if I go to the profit and loss, then I'm going to see this this column. I'm sorry, not the profit and loss. If I go to the balance sheet, I'm going to see the unclassified column here. So there's the 3,000. I'm going to say, unclassified, that means something's wrong. But it's in, I know where it should go because it's going to B2. I'm in the B2 inventory account, and everything in B2 inventory should be in column 2. So I'm going to just say, all right, I know where that's got to go. So I'm going to double click on it, and then double click on it, and I'll just add a class now, which is going to be B2. B2, and then save it and close it, and yes, and then yes. And then okay, and then now it's in the inventory for B2, and the unclassified has now gone away because there's nothing in it. So there's that, and that looks good. Now let's go for a sale. Let's say we have a sale of B2 stuff. So we'll go on down to the invoice side of things, invoicing. So let's make another customer here. I'm going to say another customer. This is going to be customer number. What are we on? We're on 15, let's just say 15, and this will be for B2 customer. We'll set up this B2 customer for the business number 2. I'm going to put the B2 up here, but not down here, so it doesn't actually show on the invoice. Then I'll also put it in the additional information. We'll put a B2 there as well, B2, and then we're going to say okay, and that looks good. So then the class, we could assign the class up here. I'm going to go ahead and go through this. However, I'll change the date to the 20th. And then we're going to have our item, which was an inventory item number 2. Inventory item number 2, let's say we're selling 17 of them, just for 17 of them. And then the class, we would want to assign the class down here. The class isn't being assigned because it's assigned by account, even though the account is defined in the inventory items. QuickBooks can't see it because it only sees the item right now. So if we were to do it by item, then the class would be assigned automatically, because we're doing it by account. Or if you're using Pro or something like that, you have to actually assign the class, which in this case would be B2. We could see that it's going to be B2 given the fact that we set up the item in the name of the item, and we set up in the customer name that we can see up top too. So what's this going to do? It's going to increase the receivable, and it should be going into the receivable account for B2 as well. We're going to set it up going into the B2 receivable account. And that would only be an option if you had 2 receivable accounts. So we set up 2 receivable accounts. So it's going to go into B2 receivable. It's going to go into the class of B2 column wise. It's going to increase revenue by the 4,250 in the revenue account for B2. And it's also going to be in the column for B2. It's also going to decrease the cost of goods sold by, I think it was 150 times the 17 here. And then it's going to be decreasing the inventory. Let's check it out. We're going to save it and close it, save it and close it. Checking it out. Let's go to the balance sheet. Yeah, let's go to the balance sheet over here. And we're going to say the accounts receivable is going up. So here in B2, balance sheet, accounts receivable. Accounts receivable goes up in B2. So there we have it. There's the invoice, the $4,250, closing that out. The other side of it will be on the P&L, the profit and loss, the income statement. It's going to be in this account for sales B2. It's going to be in the B2 column. Double clicking on that. We then have the invoice here. That looks good. That looks like what we would expect. Then on the balance sheet, let's go back to the balance sheet. We know inventory must have decreased now. Inventory went down. We got the separate account for B2 as well as in the B2 column. So we got that kind of double check here because we use two accounts. Double clicking on that. We see the invoice decreasing it by the $2,550. If I double click on that, that amount's not on the invoice. Why? Because we don't want to show it to the customer, but we know that that's driven by the inventory item. So which was, I think, $150. So closing this back out. The other side then on the profit and loss, the P&L, the income statement. So then we have the cost of goods sold, and there's the $2,550 in B2 there. If I double click on that, there we have it as well. So closing that back out, going back to the balance sheet. So back to the balance sheet, we now have the $19,950 in B2. So if I went to our inventory valuation summary and track that information, remember we filtered it by the specific items, which now we have that $19,950 in it. So that's some options to basically working with the inventory. Again, you have some different options in terms of, do you want to set up another account and have two inventory and two cost of goods sold, or just use the classes? And if you have a lot of inventory in different locations, then you may want to consider going to changing those options once again. If you have the enterprise version in the accounting options company, and setting up the default instead of by account, by the item, if you're mainly concerned with driving, the items to the proper area, which are kind of the more complex type of transactions when you're dealing with inventory. So it might be, in that case, if you have complex inventory needs and multiple classes and locations that are driven by classes, it might be the best way is to set the default by item, or possibly even the names might work a little bit better too, because then you can drive the whole inventory transaction possibly by the customer when purchasing and the vendor when paying. So there's some trade-offs in terms of what's the best option depending on your needs for those three.